On a late rainy night in a quiet town, a black man drives home after a long, exhausting shift. But when he sees a lone woman stranded on the road, he stops to help her. By morning, his peaceful world is shattered as a black helicopter hovers over his house and men in suits knock on his door. What he doesn't know is that his simple act of kindness the night before has brought him an opportunity he never thought he'd have. Marcus Carter had always been a man who carried his burdens in silence. At 43, he had already seen more than his fair share of life's cruelty. Once he had a home filled with warmth, with the laughter of his wife, Lena, echoing through their Chicago apartment. But those days were gone. Lena had been taken from him by an unforgiving illness, leaving Marcus alone in a world that never seemed to have space for a black man just trying to get by. The city that had once felt alive now suffocated him, so he packed up what little he had and moved back to Brookhaven, the small town he had grown up in, a place where everyone knew everyone, and where opportunities for people like him were as scarce as a friendly face at a police checkpoint. Brookhaven wasn't a town known for its kindness toward black folks. The stares, the whispers, the casual condescension, it was all part of life here. Marcus knew the rules. Keep your head down, work hard. Don't give them a reason to look at you twice, so he did what he had to do. He took a job as a factory worker at Brookhaven Auto Parts, spending his days in the stifling heat of the assembly line, hands stained with grease, back aching from hours of labor. It wasn't a dream job, not even close, but it paid just enough to keep a roof over his head. But just enough wasn't enough. Rent, bills, food, everything added up faster than his paycheck could keep up. So when the sun went down, Marcus clocked out of the factory, wiped the sweat from his brow, and headed straight to his second job at Popeye's. The night shift wasn't easy, especially not for a man his age, but at least there he could breathe. He didn't have to worry about anyone looking at him like he didn't belong. The smell of fried chicken clung to his clothes long after his shift ended, but it was honest work, and Marcus had never been a man to turn his back on honest work. He used to dream about owning his own auto shop. Ever since he was a kid, he had imagined a garage with his name on the sign, a place where folks could bring their cars, knowing they'd get good service, fair prices. He could see it so clearly. The sound of wrenches clanking, the hum of an engine coming back to life under his hands. But dreams like that required money, and money was something Marcus never seemed to have enough of. Life had a way of reminding him that men like him didn't get handed opportunities. They had to claw for them. It wasn't just the struggle that wore him down, it was the way people saw him. The way certain customers at Popeye's looked at him like he was invisible, or, worse, like he was something to be wary of. The way some of the guys at the factory muttered under their breath when he walked by, their voices laced with the kind of casual racism they didn't even bother hiding. "Bet he's got a record," one of them had once said, loud enough for Marcus to hear, surprised they let him work here. He had clenched his jaw and kept moving. That was what you did. You endured. That night, as Marcus finished his shift and stepped out into the pouring rain, he was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled deep in his muscles, making every step feel heavier than the last. He pulled his hood up against the downpour, the neon glow of the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement as he walked to his truck. It wasn't much, an old Ford that had seen better days. But it got him home, and home, as small and lonely as it was all he had. He climbed into the driver's seat, sighed, and started the engine. Another long day behind him, another waiting for him tomorrow. He had no idea that tonight, this night, in the middle of a storm, everything was about to change. The rain came down in sheets as Marcus navigated the winding back roads of Brookhaven, his windshield wipers working overtime against the storm. The road was nearly deserted, which wasn't surprising. No one with sense would be out here this late, especially not in weather like this. He just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and let exhaustion pull him under for a few hours before it all started again. But as he rounded a bend on Willow Creek Road, his headlights caught something up ahead. A figure standing by the side of the road, soaked to the bone, one hand raised in a hesitant wave. Marcus sighed. He should keep driving. This wasn't Chicago. Out here, a black man stopping for a white woman on a deserted road in the middle of the night? That was the kind of thing that could go wrong in more ways than one. He could already picture the headlines. Local man arrested in suspicious late-night encounter. Or worse. No headlines at all, just the kind of accident the sheriff's department never bothered to investigate. But then he looked closer. She was shivering, her thin coat clinging to her like a second skin. Her blonde hair was plastered to her face, strands sticking to her cheeks. She wasn't just waiting for a ride, she was desperate for one. Marcus exhaled sharply, debating with himself for another few seconds before he finally pulled over. The woman hesitated, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him, and he couldn't blame her. When she finally stepped closer, he leaned over, pushed the passenger door open, and nodded. "You need a ride?" She hesitated just a second longer, then climbed in, her hands shaking as she pulled the door shut. "Thank you," she breathed, wrapping her arms around herself. Marcus reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small towel he kept there. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Ain't much, but it's dry." She took it with a grateful nod, dabbing at her face before glancing over at him. "I'm Rachel," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Marcus," he replied, putting the truck back in gear. "Where you headed?" She hesitated. "Summerhill Avenue, a friend's place." Marcus frowned. Summerhill wasn't too far, maybe a 15-minute drive, but something about her answer felt off. He hadn't seen a car broken down on the way, and there weren't exactly a lot of places she could have walked from. But he didn't press her. It wasn't his business. They rode in silence for a while, the rain drumming against the roof, the soft hum of the engine the only sound between them. Then, out of nowhere, Rachel asked, "Do you always pick up strangers in the middle of the night?" Marcus huffed a quiet laugh. "Not usually. Figured you wouldn't find another ride out here." "Well, I appreciate it." She paused, then, "You from here?" "Grew up here, left for a while, came back." She tilted her head. "Why?" Marcus's grip on the wheel tightened for just a second before he forced himself to relax. He wasn't used to talking about himself, especially not to strangers, but something about Rachel's tone, curious but not intrusive, made him answer. "My wife. She passed. Didn't make sense to stay in Chicago without her." "I'm sorry." "Yeah," Marcus murmured, his eyes on the road. "Me too." Another stretch of silence, then, quietly, Rachel asked, "What was she like?" Marcus hadn't expected that. Most people offered their condolences and left it at that, never really wanting to hear the answer. He glanced at Rachel, saw the genuine interest in her eyes, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he told her. He talked about Lena, about how they met in high school, about how she used to laugh with her whole body, about how she could fix a car as well as he could and still turn heads whenever they walked into a room. He told her how when Lena got sick he had worked double shifts, triple shifts, anything he could to pay for treatments that never worked, how he had held her hand in that hospital room, whispering to her about all the things they'd still do, even as he felt her slipping away. When he finally stopped talking, Rachel was quiet for a long moment before she said, "She sounds like she was amazing." She was. Rachel didn't pry any further. Instead, she just nodded and looked out the window as the rain continued to fall. Marcus cleared his throat, suddenly feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. "Enough about me," he said. "What about you?" Rachel smiled, but there was something distant about it. "Maybe next time," she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. People had their reasons for keeping things to themselves. He could respect that. 15 minutes later, he pulled onto Summerhill Avenue. The streetlights cast long shadows across the wet pavement, the rain finally dying down to a soft drizzle. Rachel gestured for him to stop at the corner instead of in front of any particular house. "You sure you don't want me to drop you off closer?" Marcus asked. She shook her head. "This is fine." That same uneasy feeling flickered in his chest, but he ignored it. It wasn't his place to question. Rachel turned to him, offering a small smile. "Thank you, Marcus. Not just for the ride. For the conversation." Marcus nodded. "Take care of yourself." She lingered for a second, like she wanted to say something else, but then she just opened the door, stepped out into the night, and disappeared down the sidewalk. Marcus watched her go for a moment before shaking his head and pulling away. He didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the last time he'd see Rachel Brooks, not by a long shot. The next morning, Marcus was ripped from sleep by a noise so loud it rattled the windows. The deep, thunderous hump of a helicopter's rotor blades sent a tremor through the air, shaking the walls of his small house. His heart pounded as he sat up, disoriented, the remnants of sleep still clinging to him. He could hear the low rumble of engines outside, the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. Still dressed in his wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, Marcus swung his legs off the bed and stumbled to the window. What he saw made his stomach drop. A black helicopter hovered directly above his yard, its powerful searchlight cutting through the early morning haze. On the street below, 3 sleek black SUVs were parked at odd angles, their engines still running. 4 men in dark suits stood near his front porch, their presence stiff, calculated. They didn't belong here. They didn't belong in Brookhaven at all. Marcus swallowed hard, his pulse thundering in his ears. This wasn't the police. Brookhaven's department barely had working patrol cars, let alone black ops-style SUVs. He knew trouble when he saw it. And this was trouble. A sharp knock echoed through his small house, making him flinch. Hell no. Every instinct told him to stay put, to let whoever was out there move along, but that damn helicopter kept circling like a vulture, making it clear they weren't going anywhere. He took a steadying breath and walked to the door. When he opened it, he was met with the sight of a tall, clean-cut white man in a black suit, his sharp jawline and close-cropped hair making him look straight out of a government agency. Behind him, 3 more men stood rigid, hands clasped in front of them. They all had the same cold, unreadable expressions, like they were sizing Marcus up, deciding whether or not he was a threat. Marcus felt his body tense, instinct kicking in. He knew exactly how this looked. A black man standing in the doorway of a run-down house, staring down 4 white men in suits. This had "bad ending" written all over it. The lead man, clearly the one in charge, took a step forward. His voice was smooth, practiced, controlled. "Mr. Carter?" It wasn't a question. Marcus kept his face neutral. "Who's asking?" The man offered a thin, polite smile, but there was something off about it, something too perfect. "My name is James Holloway. I represent Miss Rachel Brooks. She would like to see you." "Rachel." Marcus blinked. The name alone knocked the breath from his chest. Rachel Brooks. The woman he had picked up last night, the woman who had barely told him anything about herself, the woman who had stepped out of his truck and vanished into the night. And now, less than 10 hours later, there was a damn helicopter over his house because of her. Marcus folded his arms, forcing his expression to stay neutral. "She would like to see me," he repeated, his voice flat. "She couldn't just call?" Holloway's smile didn't waver. "Miss Brooks prefers a more direct approach." He gestured toward the helicopter. "She's waiting." Marcus let out a slow breath, his mind racing. Everything about this felt wrong, but at the same time, if they wanted to hurt him, they wouldn't be knocking. They sure as hell wouldn't be using Rachel's name. He glanced past Holloway at the SUVs, then up at the helicopter. The massive machine hovered lower now, its downdraft kicking up dust and shaking the branches of the half-dead tree in his yard. This was power. This was money. And Rachel Brooks, whoever the hell she was, had plenty of both. Marcus exhaled, gritted his teeth, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to change." Holloway gave him another polished, rehearsed smile. Of course. The helicopter was even bigger up close, its matte black body gleaming under the pale morning sun. Marcus climbed in, the interior sleek and modern, every detail screaming wealth. The scent of leather and jet fuel filled the cabin, mixing with something floral. Perfume. And then, there she was. Rachel Brooks sat in one of the plush leather seats, legs crossed, looking like she had been born in places like this. She was no longer drenched in rain, no longer just a shivering woman on the side of the road. Now she was composed, polished, dressed in an elegant dark blue blouse, her blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. The only thing that hadn't changed was the way she smiled when she saw him. "Marcus," she said smoothly, like they were old friends meeting for coffee. "I knew we'd see each other again." Marcus sat across from her, his body still tense, his mind still struggling to catch up. "Yeah, well, you have a hell of a way of saying hello." Rachel let out a small laugh. "I suppose I do." The helicopter lurched upward, and Marcus instinctively gripped the armrest, feeling the force of the ascent press him into the seat. The cabin hummed with power, the city of Brookhaven shrinking below them as they climbed higher into the sky. He turned back to Rachel, his eyes narrowing. "All right," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Who the hell are you?" Rachel's smile didn't waver as she crossed one leg over the other. Her movements slow, deliberate, like a cat stretching in the sun. The hum of the helicopter's engines filled the space between them, a constant pulsing vibration beneath Marcus's feet. Outside the window, the landscape below blurred into a vast green expanse, roads slicing through the land like veins. Brookhaven was disappearing behind them, getting smaller and smaller, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that whatever this was, it was bigger than him. Rachel tilted her head slightly, studying him as if deciding how much to say. Then, with a soft sigh, she leaned forward, resting her forearms on her knees. "My full name is Rachel Brooks Whitmore," she said, her voice smooth, measured. "My father is William Whitmore." Marcus didn't react at first. The name meant nothing to him, but then, like a delayed punch to the gut, it clicked. William Whitmore. Whitmore Industries. The William Whitmore. His expression must have given him away, because Rachel's smile turned knowing. "I see you recognize it now," she said. Marcus exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. Whitmore Industries wasn't just any company. It was one of the biggest private tech and defense firms in the country. Weapons manufacturing, surveillance technology, government contracts that stretched into the billions. Big money. Big power. And Rachel. Rachel was his daughter. "Jesus," Marcus muttered under his breath, shaking his head. He looked at her again, this time really looking. It all made sense now. The men in suits, the helicopter, the way she'd carried herself even when she was drenched in rain, the way she'd avoided telling him anything about herself last night. She hadn't been scared. She had been testing him. Marcus's jaw clenched. "All right," he said, his voice tight. "So what, you just wander into backwater towns to see if strangers will pick you up?" Rachel let out a quiet laugh, the sound barely audible over the thrum of the rotor blades. "Not exactly," she admitted. "But I do like to see how people treat me when they don't know my name. When they don't see a last name with a $1 billion price tag attached to it." Marcus scoffed, shifting in his seat. "So what, I passed some kind of test?" Rachel's smile faltered just slightly, as if his reaction wasn't what she had expected. "You were kind," she said simply. "You didn't hesitate to help me, even when you had every reason not to. Most people wouldn't have stopped, and even if they did, they sure as hell wouldn't have treated me like a person." She paused, studying him. "You didn't ask for anything, not even a name." Marcus shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Didn't seem like my business." Rachel watched him for a moment longer, then reached beside her and tapped the armrest. Almost immediately, one of the suited men at the front of the cabin turned and handed her a brown leather briefcase. She took it, setting it on her lap, fingers trailing over the metal clasps. Then, slowly, she flipped it open. Marcus expected stacks of cash. That would have made sense. Rich people, gilt money. But instead, Rachel pulled out a single manila envelope and extended it to him. Marcus didn't take it immediately. He stared at it, then at her. "What is this?" Rachel smiled again, but this time it was different, softer, real. "An investment," she said. Marcus hesitated, then took the envelope. It was thick, heavier than it looked. He peeled back the flap and pulled out a stack of neatly bound documents. The first thing he saw was his own name, typed in bold at the top of the first page. Then, below it, "Deed of ownership, Carter Automotive and Repair." Marcus's throat tightened. His fingers curled around the papers as if they might disappear. His eyes scanned the fine print, words blurring together, his brain struggling to keep up. Rachel leaned back in her seat, watching him carefully. "That garage on Maple Street," she said casually. "It's yours now, fully paid for, no strings attached." Marcus felt his chest tighten, an invisible weight pressing down on him. He swallowed hard. "This is too much." Rachel tilted her head. "What?" He blinked, gripping the envelope like it might slip through his fingers. "Because I didn't do anything," he said, his voice rough. "I picked up a stranger in the rain. That's it. I didn't ask for this. I don't—" "You didn't do anything?" Rachel cut in, her voice gentle but firm. "Marcus, you changed my entire perspective in one night." He looked at her, brows furrowing. "You didn't look at me like a problem to solve. You didn't try to take advantage of me. You didn't treat me like I owed you something. You were just kind. Do you know how rare that is? How rare people like you are?" She shook her head, exhaling. "You deserve something good, Marcus. You just need someone to believe in you." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then shook his head, his chest tightening. "This isn't how life works," he muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. "People like me, we don't get second chances handed to us in envelopes." Rachel's expression turned knowing. "People like you," she echoed. "You mean black men like you?" Marcus met her eyes, his jaw tightening. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Rachel nodded as if she understood something unspoken. "You're right," she said softly. "It's not fair. The world's never going to give you what you deserve, Marcus, but I can." The helicopter lurched slightly as it began to descend, the landscape shifting beneath them. Marcus gripped the envelope a little tighter, his knuckles turning white. He didn't know what to say, didn't know how to accept something like this. Rachel smiled again, softer this time. "Take it," she said simply. "Not because you owe me, not because it's charity, but because sometimes good people should get a break too." Marcus exhaled shakily, staring down at the deed in his hands, the weight of it, the possibility of it. For the first time in years he felt something stir in his chest, something unfamiliar, something dangerous. Pow! The helicopter touched down with a soft jolt, the rotor blades still roaring overhead as the wind kicked up dust and loose gravel. Marcus barely registered it. His fingers tightened around the deed in his lap, the weight of Rachel's words still pressing against his chest like a hand squeezing his ribs. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He looked up, his eyes locking onto Rachel's. She was still watching him, waiting, the kind of patience that only came from people who had never been rushed a day in their lives. She looked so sure, so damn certain that this was the right thing to do, but Marcus couldn't make sense of it. He had spent his whole life earning every scrap of success he had, working himself into the ground for wages that barely covered rent, putting up with condescending looks, unspoken rules, the silent expectation that men like him should be grateful for whatever little they got. He had fought for every inch, clawed his way forward with blood and sweat and silence because making noise, demanding more, wasn't an option. And now, this woman, this billionaire's daughter, was sitting across from him, handing him the one thing he had stopped allowing himself to dream about, a second chance, a real one. No debt, no strings, just his. It didn't make sense. The helicopter door swung open. One of Rachel's men, Holloway, stood just outside, his polished shoes planted firmly on the tarmac of what looked like a private airfield. Beyond him, a sleek black car idled near a chain-linked fence, waiting to take Rachel wherever she needed to go next. She stood first, smooth and effortless, stepping toward the open door before turning back to him. "You don't have to take it," she said over the whir of the blades. "If you walk away, I won't blame you. But if you do—" She gestured toward the envelope in his hands, her blue eyes steady. "Then let yourself believe, just for once, that maybe you deserve this." Marcus swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. He told himself it was from the turbulence, but deep down he knew better. Rachel stepped down onto the tarmac, the wind whipping her hair around her face. She turned back one last time, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "I'll be seeing you, Marcus Carter," she called over the roar of the helicopter. And then she was gone. Marcus sat there, frozen, as the door shut and the aircraft began to lift again. The tarmac blurred below him, the black car shrinking into the distance, the figures on the ground becoming nothing more than shadows. The envelope sat heavy in his lap, the paper warm beneath his fingertips. He didn't move, not until the helicopter was far enough away that Brookhaven's skyline began to emerge in the distance. Not until he saw the town again, his town, the one he had spent his whole life believing would never give him more than scraps. For the first time in years, Marcus Carter felt something other than exhaustion settle into his bones. No, the garage on Maple Street had been empty for years. The sign above the entrance had once belonged to an old mechanic named Red Holloway, a white man who had run the place for decades before retiring to Florida. Marcus remembered riding past it as a kid, staring at the cars lined up outside, dreaming about working there one day. Now it belonged to him. Stepping inside, the air smelled of dust and old oil. The concrete floors were cracked, the metal shelves lining the walls half empty, but the bones of the place were good. The hydraulic lifts were still functional, the toolboxes, though rusting at the edges, were salvageable. It wasn't the gleaming, state-of-the-art shop Marcus had once fantasized about, but it was real. It was his. And for the first time in a long damn time, he wasn't just surviving, he was building something. The first few months were slow. He used what little savings he had to hire a few local guys, kids who reminded him too much of himself at their age, looking for a way out, a chance to make something of themselves. The first time he saw the sign above the door change, from Holloway's Auto to Carter Automotive and Repair, something in his chest shifted. Rachel checked in from time to time, never unannounced, always with a smirk and a question that sounded casual but wasn't. "So, Marcus, how's it feel to be your own boss?" At first he didn't know how to answer. Now, months later, standing in the middle of his own shop, his name on the building, his tools in his hands, he finally had one. "Damn good." Rachel grinned. "Told you." She didn't stay long. She never did, but as she slipped back into her blacked-out town car, Marcus knew she would always come back. And as he watched her leave, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garage floor, he realized something. Somewhere along the way, a stranger in the rain had become a friend. And because of that one small moment, because of one act of kindness, his life had changed forever. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.